So, completely unrelated to any events going on in the world, just a completely random question. If you could elect any one rugby player as the president of rugby, who would you vote for? Which rugby player would you want to be in charge of if hypothetically all rugbymen went off and started their own nation, they declared independence somewhere? Who would you vote for? Who would you want to be your new rugby president? I'd obviously try and skew the vote towards Alan Jones, but who would you want to vote for? Let us know and we'll read plenty out next week. I guess, of course, this week, perhaps the biggest headline was that we discovered that the Carney brothers, Rob and Dave, of course, are distant cousins of new President-elect of the United States, Joe Biden. Rob replied with quite a cheeky tweet to the president 4 years on from him congratulating him for beating the All Blacks. And sticking with the All Blacks, and sticking with dramatic and surprise wins, Australia, having lost by a record margin last week, came back to beat the All Blacks 24-22. It's a fantastic game of rugby with everything you could possibly watch. You couldn't look away for more than a few seconds because something would happen. There were 2 red cards with yellow cards, there were tries aplenty, 10 yellow, 2 posts scoring 1 that looked like it sealed it, then Vi scored and it looked like it might not be so level, but then the Wallabies saw it out. Mikko Becky was fantastic, made 2 great hits in the last minute. Fantastic game with everything you could possibly want from a rugby match. And I'll be looking at that in a bit more detail slightly later on. However, speaking of dramatic fixtures, we had the most dramatic possible fixture in the Premier 15s this weekend as Loughborough Lightning took on Harlequins, the 2 unbeaten teams in the competition going into this round of the first 5 games. And, I mean, one of them knew they weren't going to be any more, and that team turned out to be Loughborough, as Harlequins were fantastic and managed to see themselves past Loughborough and put them top of the table after those 6 rounds being played. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they can hold out for the rest of the season. Speaking top of the table stuff then, La Rochelle went to top of the French League, top 14. After beating Clermont, Clermont have been in pretty good form over the last few weeks and yet slipped up to La Rochelle. However, the big news coming out of France is not related to any game in particular. It's that the one and only Yoann Huget, a notorious player, if not a fan favourite, is retiring. He's been one of my favourite players to watch for the last decade or so. He's a player who's completely genuinely unpredictable. Oh, yeah. Well, normally when you say that I play, you mean like Cheslin Colbert. You don't know if they're going to step left, step right, or they're going to chip over the top. But with Yoann Huget, he's just as likely to do any of those things as he is to punch the referee. Like, there's nothing Yoann Huget could do on a rugby pitch that would surprise me at all, and there's nothing he could do in his post-rugby career that could surprise me at all. He's been doing cooking tutorials lately on Instagram. I'd love to see him keep more of those up and keep going with those. So yeah, all the best of luck to the one and only Yoann Huget, who described his career as being hard yet beautiful, and I think that's as fair a description as anyone could possibly give. Meanwhile, in Super Rugby Unlocked, we had another round of games as the Bulls saw off a narrow win, 25-30, in what was probably the game of the weekend. Plenty of tries in action there. There were lots of tries as the Stormers really flew past the Grickwars, who played some good rugby but weren't quite able to get the tries on the board against the Stormers team, who had, I would say, enough World Cup winners in their team. You know, they had a few of them floating about. And then on the Friday night, the Sharks managed to squeak past the Cheetahs, who, again, kept it quite tight, but the Sharks saw it out late on. The one other interesting contest in this week was not on the pitch, as World Rugby looked to see if you could Photoshop this image of Geordie Barrett into whatever interesting situations you could find. So here he is, jumping away from a dinosaur. Ooh. Here he is in a washing machine. Kiwi rugby fan labels it All Black ball retention practice. Ooh. Very good. Slightly ironic considering the weekend, but otherwise very good. Here he is as a kind of red arrows display flying through the air. There's 3 of them. There's basically the three Barrett brothers. Here he is. This one's maybe my favourite from Stockport Pal, who has him on a bike from Tron, and they've there's attention to detail here. Like, they've colour graded it to look like Tron. It's very fine work, very good work. And then last but not least, here he is in Indiana Jones, stealing the artifact from under his nose. Now, this is great in and of itself, but if you notice who it's by, this was sent in by the one and only Vasily Artemyev, captain of the Russian national team at last year's World Cup, who has proven himself to not only be a very able winger, a very able fullback, a pretty able centre, and owner of a glorious, magnificent moustache, but also pretty handy with Photoshop. This is my new favourite kind of thing. I am so excited by seeing this. I want to see more Tier 2 nation captains Photoshop All Blacks into screen grabs of Steven Spielberg films. I'm desperately looking forward to next week where Merab Sherekadze photoshops Carl Two in a Cafe into a screenshot of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Don't let me down, Merab. I know you watch it. I know you watched it. I know you watched this. Anyway, speaking of all that, speaking of Barrett, speaking of all of that, here is a slightly closer look at how the All Blacks were able to lose to the Wallabies were able to beat the All Blacks in the rugby that took place, the Bledisloe Cup, the rugby.
Week 4 of the Bledisloe, week 2 of the Tri-Nations, and things swang once again, right from the off. Reece Hodge's fun little chip off the first line of the game, allowing the Toms to combine with Banks putting right in the corner for a hell of a first touch of Test rugby. Hodge catches Severy slightly too far wide, and then a great bounce. We'll call it, it's just definitely deliberate by Hodge, definitely meant this, allows the Wallabies to walk it in. However, Tom Wright was the one of the 4 debutants who could be pretty happy with how their debut went. Will Jordan hit his head in his first tackle and had to go back off. Akira Ioane was brought off after half an hour, and Ofatunga Farsi saw red, only for Lachlan Swinton, having an absolute blinder up until then, to suffer the one thing worse and see red himself. However, this didn't affect the quality of the game whatsoever. It didn't kill it as a contest. Some excellent kicking by Reece Hodge put Australia back ahead before this pop by Fayenga to Taniela Tupou caught the All Blacks slightly. They weren't quite looking. Tupou drives over and scores to put Australia in front. Whilst a late score by Vai may have put the All Blacks back in touch, a hell of a hit in the last play by Muka Koriabeti saved the Wallabies, taking them to what could be a huge win, their first win under Dave Rennie, in just the second round of the Tri-Nations, before Argentina come along and try to do exactly this to the All Blacks next week.
So, last week we asked you who are the best rugby players to never win a Rugby World Cup. We have loads of great shouts. So Tatenda says Brian O'Driscoll comes to mind. Hard to argue with. However, their vote in the end goes for Augustin Pichot. They say as a teenager they had no idea Argentina even played rugby until watching Pichot captain Argentina to that famous semi-final in 2007. JTS Brown and Texie123 have a whole load of shouts, and then he also notes at the end, I'm Italian, so I'd add Parise as well. I think anyone who plays 100 test matches of their country and loses but is still great throughout pretty much all of them deserves Parise deserved a World Cup. Parise deserves to have one of those medals on his cabinet. Really good shout here for Jean de Villiers, who presumably, you'd guess, would have started the 2007 final, would have won that World Cup, but for a bicep injury early on. So yeah, really good shout there. We have Dustois, Lomu coming up again and again and again. So it's Blanco, Gautier, there's loads of them here. Kaito says Wilgenia, Nwandolo, Tanner Umanga, and then he also mentions, and I want to draw particular attention to Jerry Collins, who would have turned 40 last week. And I think everyone who came across Jerry in any club, anywhere he touched within rugby, loved him very dearly, and it would have been magnificent if he could have left as a Rugby World Cup winner, but alas, was not to be. Juan Manuel Gaminara, mentioned by Duan, who, I mean, can you imagine how much Gaminara would have cried if Uruguay ever won the World Cup? Like how proud he would be of his country. It's glorious. You could probably power cities on the waterworks produced, you know, on kind of green energy, just putting a water wheel near Gaminara's eyes as he won the World Cup. And I want to leave it on this by Laura Webster, who says, a player I've never heard of, Johannini Wilkinson, who I've never heard of, but sounds magnificent, sounds like a great player, and I am going to go away and do as I imagine that player would want me to do, and get up at 6 in the morning every morning and practice, putting the extra hours practicing learning to say his name. So I'm going to do that. In the meantime, there's loads of rugby coming up this week, and I'm very excited for you to see all of that. In the meantime, please let us know who would be your rugby president, who would that be if you had a choice, and I will see you next week for more of The Feed.